Hello. In this week's lesson, we'll be going over the principles of squash and stretch and anticipation and understanding what the heck that means. So let's find out. So let's start with what squash and stretch is. Let's take this little ball, which I've animated and is exaggerated, but just to illustrate something. When a ball is bouncing and you actually see it, and this is an exaggeration, but essentially what it's doing is when it's at its apex, which means it's kind of defying gravity, it's reached a point, it's hovering, and it's equally dispersed, it's in a resting state. When it comes down, to show motion, it stretches. It actually appears elongated, and this is just a little animation trick that actually helps to convey motion. When the ball hits the ground, and we'll just do this in a little step by step. As the ball hits the ground, it squashes. So unless it is a solid mass and it's actually just hard like a bowling ball, which by the way, don't try this with a bowling ball. I've tried it before, and let's just say the results are somewhat destructive and they look like a giant jawbreaker when they open up. So and the person who owns the bowling ball isn't going to be too happy with you. But as we actually see, when it bounces, bam, it hits the ground, its mass disperses and it squashes out. When it goes back up and starts to extend out, it starts to stretch back outward. Then there's the resting state, and then it repeats this, bam, goes back out. And this, I've exaggerated it just so that you can actually see it. But that's the whole concept. Right? So if I have something in motion and I'm animating it, depending on what that object is made out of, and remember, animation is communication. So I'm actually trying to show and communicate that this guy is made of a certain material, that it's moving pretty fast, and that it's actually dispersing its weight. So as it stretches, imagine being pulled into a black hole, it's going to elongate. And then when it actually hits, it's going to squash out. And that mass isn't strong enough to penetrate the floor, but it's going to spread out and then it's going to go back out. We can see this in real life if you look at your foot, your bare foot, and you step on the ground. Watch what your foot does. It'll actually expand out. It'll stretch out. And then when you lift your foot up, it goes back into a resting state. If you're moving your foot at a great velocity, it would slightly elongate. Like if you're doing a football kick, it would appear that your foot is actually getting a little bit thinner when you do it. So that's squash and stretch. And this can be applied not just to bouncing balls, but also to characters, right? So if we look at a character, and this is where anticipation comes in and how it's married to squash and stretch. So a character is at rest, it's normal, she's just standing there, and she wants to make a jump. So as she actually goes and positions, this is anticipation. So our character, when we look, she's going to go, jump, land, and then come back. Anticipation is basically the action before an action. And what that means is if she were to just be here and then just jump straight up into the air, so to go from here to here, that would look a little bit weird. Because on a subconscious level, we actually know that that's unless she's a superhero and can levitate, that's not possible. So anticipation, particularly in animation, is communicating that an action is about to happen by having a negative action. So in this particular case, the character is going to bend down and squat down, kind of squash herself a little bit, and then this is telling us, oh, she's about to jump. So we're anticipating that she's going to actually jump. And as she actually jumps, then, much like that ball, she stretches back out. So she squashed, then she started to stretch out. Then she has that resting state. A little bit more squashed here. Once again, this is a rough block out. She stretches back out as she's going in for a landing, and then she squashes down again to come to a resting state. So how that compares with a ball is that you're actually going to see that same squash and stretch, and that squash is an anticipation that this guy still has a lot of energy that's going to be flailing back out, and that's going to shoot back out, throw that up, come back in, and then just repeat that cycle. So that's the concept of squash and stretch. Now, what you're going to do with your assignment is you're going to look at animations, and you're going to have to be able to pick out what and where you see squash and stretch happening and where you see anticipation. And understand that anticipation is not just that extreme. In cartoons and in animations, or even in real life, if a pitcher is about to throw a ball, he throws his arm back and leans back, lifts his leg up, and then hurls it forward and then extends himself outward. That's anticipation. If I'm about to reach into a magic hat to pull out a little bunny rabbit, I lift my arm way up so everybody can watch my hand, and then it goes down into the top hat to grab a little bunny rabbit out if I'm doing a magic trick. So these are all examples, and I want you to actually be able to articulate and see in the animation examples that you'll be reviewing this week, uh, talk about and point out where you see squash and stretch and where you see anticipation. Let's get started.